Guys, gals, non-binary pals, welcome to the Seaglass Perspective podcast, hosted by Seaglass Counseling and Wellness, a podcast about finding resilience while weathering the storm. I'm your co-host, Vincent Covelli, joined with us today with Chris Nakos. I'm sorry, Nakos.
Nakos.
No, Nakos? Oh my God, I got it this time. So I'm not cutting that.
Yeah,
so, yeah, perfect. Chris, what's going on? New week, new day. How's the weather?
Yeah, it's great. We are recording on March 11th, and 2.5 weeks ago we had 2 feet of snow, and today it's going to be 70. So
yeah, I'll take it.
Universe is topsy-turvy.
I'd seen a buddy of mine yesterday who was, shoveling snow and plowing for his town and stuff like that. And he's like, 2 weeks ago, I was making hundreds of dollars. Now I'm just sitting in my backyard enjoying time with a Dr. Pepper. I'm like, bless your soul, man. Yeah, it works. It works. But today, I think, over the past couple episodes, and I think in the coming episodes, I feel like what we're doing in these introductory components of a lot of this is, kind of just talking about the bare basics of therapy and, overall mental health components and stuff like that. And last week in our episode, we talked about, different titles, licensures, who to see, who might best fit you, what's the importance of all of that. And now that, and, aside from therapists, also with, psychiatric providers. But moving on from that, now we're kind of, I suppose, I hate to say getting into the nitty gritty of it all, but almost kind of getting into the nitty gritty of some of this, right? We're talking, because today we plan on talking about emotions. Actually, we plan on talking about anxiety at the beginning of this all, but we kind of figured it might be more prudent of us to start laying some of this foundation work, right? Talking more about just general emotions, how we experience different emotions, things like that.
Yeah, it's kind of like what we said last week, where we've all heard the word support, but how we define it is important. Yes. Because if we can't define it, we can't figure out if we've got it. And same thing with emotions. We all have heard the word. We all know the word. If you grew up watching Sesame Street, you had it. A lot of elementary schools have the emotion picture sheet in the classroom and stuff like that. Yes. Every parent-teacher conference, every back-to-school that I've been to. It disappears in the high school. Where it probably is more necessary, and it would probably be a lot bigger.
Yeah.
But yeah, every elementary school age kid has seen it. But when we become, as we get older, as our emotions and ourselves become more complicated, or it becomes a lot more difficult to describe.
And it's so much more nuanced, especially as we get older, right? Like you had said, as children, we see the, this frowny face, and that means we're sad. We see the happy face, and means we're happy. But I mean, I don't know. I've kind of white knuckled myself while grinning. This is fine. Was I really happy if I'm smiling? Or also white knuckling? Probably not. Maybe more frustrated or something like that. But more so the point being that, of emotions are so complicated and kind of are so ebb and flow in that what we're taught as children is not always the most not correct, precise, maybe.
It's
explanations.
Elementary school math, and then senior and high school math, where you're hitting calculus, you're hitting algebra 2, trigonometry, geometry, all that kind of stuff. As we become smarter, as we grow, ideally, we become smarter in school, and we advance through the classes, we get more complicated math. We get more complicated English assignments. We learn more nitty-gritty with world history and all that kind of stuff. So our emotions are the same. We just become better able to appreciate, might not necessarily be the best term, but we become better able to appreciate the nuance of emotion and to figure it out.
Yes. And, even in that, finding, the saying, find joy in the small things, right? In that sense, that nuance of, I can, enjoy my cup of coffee, and can you hear that in the background?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a cat toy. I was telling Chris earlier And so for the viewers at home, sorry if you hear some cat noise in the background. I have 2 kittens that are learning their own emotional regulation in this time, so, but the point being of, as I was saying, the nuance of, we can appreciate small ways that we can generate these emotions, right? The happiness, like, a cup of coffee makes me happy, as compared to, obviously, winning the lottery would make me absolutely ecstatic.
Yep.
Hopefully. But, it comes in degrees, right? And, there's even more, there's ways to, like, kind of break that down, right? It's not just happy, right? Or it's not just sad. There's descriptors to all of this stuff, right? Chris, would you like us to jump into the emotion wheel? Do you want to jump into? We have a bunch of things lined up for today.
Yeah, well, and so I think kind of where this conversation tends to come up, and I kind of wanted to start there, is when I'm talking with clients, when we're meeting, and I'm sure, Vincent, you've had the same experience where they're like talking through a situation, and that classic. And you kind of hate to do it sometimes, but you have to throw out the classic therapist question of, and how does that make you feel? And you have to tilt your head. Like the right side of your neck goes weak.
Yes.
So you have to ask that question. And then it's very common for people to really struggle with that answer. Or they'll start describing symptoms of an emotion or signs of an emotion, right? And when you think about those emotions, you can kind of like parse them out into like physical experience and then cognitive experience and things like that, the mental experience. And like, so like anger, the ridiculous number of ways I've had that described to me as frustration, irritability, becoming explosive, rageful, out of control. Like where people will say, well, I got really out of control there. And I'll say, well, what does that mean? Well, I was yelling at my partner. Okay, so you're angry.
Yeah.
Right? Because we put out of control as like kind of a judgment label. But in reality, we were just angry. And it's valid to be angry in that moment.
And even conversely, some people, I was thinking about this as we were kind of talking about the footnotes of the episode of, some people even experience anger in ways that might be similar to other emotions, right? Like I know some people who just completely shut down when they're angry. They bottle it up, or they kind of just go blank, head in the sand, ears plugged into their fingers plugged into their ears, going la 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 la. But people might do that when they're anxious or when they're sad, or there's a lot of like interplay in how we can describe these emotions, and that's why it's so important to kind of have these descriptors, right? Because somebody can say, I just totally shut down, and now it's like, well, how did you feel? Like, were you angry? So angry that you shut down? Were you so angry, or, so anxious that you're kind of like deer in headlights? What does that look like for us? Right.
And even that idea of shutting down, like, I've had people describe they kind of just hit their limit and they're done.
Yeah.
And like, I can kind of even draw that into a sadness kind of space where we just feel defeated. We feel exhausted. We feel just tired, mentally fatigued, emotionally fatigued, things like that. Now, and that's why it's important to parse it out, because if whatever was going on made you angry, we look at it one way. If it made you anxious, we look at it a different way. If it made you sad, it made you helpless, feel hopeless or helpless, we address that in a different way. So like, just over the years, like, as a therapist, you just kind of hear all these different ways of describing it. And a lot of times in those moments, our job becomes to just help people to label it, help people to identify it. And then we go from there. And we'll talk about that later in the episode.
And I was just going to say, like, it's something that I talk about, not slightly unrelated, I suppose, maybe. It starts to do with emotions, but more so of like the topic of being a client in therapy, like something I think I've kind of formulated on my own as I've been a therapist throughout the years, is like, some people kind of like, if they've never been, let's say it's like somebody who's never been in therapy before, some people kind of have to like develop that language a little bit, right? Like I've met plenty of I mean, not to say like a stereotype or anything, but like let's say I get an older gentleman who comes into my office, where typically they don't have like on a age cultural, like I don't know what way you'd really want to put it. It's stereotypical, unfortunately, but unfortunately my experience has kind of reinforced some of this, that oftentimes they don't know the language, they don't know how to express their anger or their sadness or their anxiety or depression or any of that. So that is why we talk about emotions in depth, to give clients this language so they can better describe, not even to us necessarily, but to the rest of the people in their life, of how to, I've seen plenty of older gentlemen who just say, pull myself up by my bootstraps and just kind of keep chugging along. And I'm like, well, how long are you going to keep chugging along until the engine just like totally breaks down because you're not giving it maintenance? Giving it maintenance, and part of that is being able to put the language to the emotion.
Mm-hmm.
Because
you got to know where to put the oil in if you're going to do an oil change.
Yeah, don't put your
oil
out
where it all is, then you can't quite keep it moving.
You don't put oil in a gas tank. I think you might blow up your engine that way. So don't do that.
I'm not sure what'll happen, but I can't imagine it'll be great.
I don't want to find out.
No. And that's like, we talk about kind of the older generations, and we talk about cultural differences and things like that. And it's absolutely true. There is a lot of tendency, especially with that, like the older generations. I'm a cusp Gen X millennial, and I don't recall having a lot of conversation about emotions in elementary school. My first introduction to psychology was high school, and it was a very bare bones class type of thing. So my age grouping up, mental health wasn't really a thing we talked about. Mental health treatment was something you had to search for. Now it's a lot easier to access. So it's just changing times, changing situations and things like that.
Even as a cusp, we call, I guess the term for me would be a zillennial. That's the term I've heard on the internet. I'm a cusp Gen Z millennial. And even for me, growing up, there was no real conversations of these things. There were no real, conversations about this is what sad looks like. I don't actually even remember having the smiley face, frowny face picture in elementary school, to be honest. I went to a private school, so they kind of were able to do what they wanted to. But it really wasn't until high school where, I started to actually become a little bit more educated and, a little bit more cognizant of these types of things. And it wasn't until AP psychology that I didn't even really know what half of these things were. I had to take an AP class to get access to this, so.
Yeah. But so it's our society. We're getting better about doing this. Heck, we are sitting here on a podcast right now talking about it. So this is becoming more common. So hopefully just as we continue to go, we just get better and better at doing it. And this is where one of those nice things that I've seen. I've already made reference to Inside Out in earlier episodes. It's my top one, honestly, therapist recommendation movie. The second one being the top two. And I was just impressed with how good of a job they did describing emotions, and then just kind of researching it and looking into it. You find out that they actually talk to psychologists and people like that to inform themselves of how to describe emotions and how to lay it all out. And I think one of their primary kind of resources was a guy named Ron Altman, Oltmanns, I believe, Altman's. And he kind of created this emotion wheel. So for those of you who are going to be watching, we're going to be throwing that up on the screen. For those of you not, like I said, just look up Wheels of Emotion and you'll find it.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
And it's he's changed it over time. He's added things, moved things around and stuff like that. But the one Inside Out went off of was this 3 kind of concentric circles. And in the center, you have 6 emotions, 6 slices of a pie. And then as you move out into those outer circles, they become more in-depth and complicated. So you start with anger, and that's sitting next to fear. And anger, as it kind of drifts towards fear, becomes like hurt, threatened, right? The other side of anger, he puts disgust. And over there, you have anger in form of critical, distant, frustrated, things like that. So he's kind of like trying to come up with a way of like visualizing these blends of emotion. Mm-hmm. And if, spoiler alert, if you haven't watched the movie yet, one of the major achievements in that first movie for the kid is that they start to blend emotions within a memory. As a young child, it's a joyful memory, it's a sad memory, it's an angry memory, it's a disgusting memory, it's a fearful memory. By the time she hits that like pre-puberty age, she's starting to blend them, where she's happy sad, mad sad, right? Yep. Things like that. Where she's feeling sadness while talking to her parents and they're hugging her and providing her support, so she's starting to feel comforted and happy, and that memory becomes blended right there. So that's one of those kind of like more label this emotion kind of simplistic models. If you want to go more complicated, for those of you who've heard of DBT, dialectical behavior therapy, it's created, right? Developed by Marsha Linehan for the treatment of borderline personality disorder, and it was kind of born out of that. But like the stuff she kind of put in there was widely applicable. And in one of the modules, or one of the in there, she talks about she created this like model for describing emotions, which is far more complicated. It gets a lot more nuanced, a lot more detailed. I think I can even pull that up. I'm just going to throw it up there for those of you watching. We apologize for how hard these might be to read, but we did our best.
We're trying, and if anything, we'll put some of these images maybe down in like the description or something like that.
We'll
like
throw some links to
some
the
of these things.
Yep. So in that, in like that DBT model, far more complicated. It's talking about, what are the triggers, obviously, what are the biological changes that we experience, the action urges that we start to have when we start to come into touch and contact with those emotions. It talks about the after effects and how we react to the emotion, and like then what does that do to inform ourselves going forward. If you want to get real nitty gritty, you can analyze the heck out of a 5-minute experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. And I've done it with clients. Sometimes we all go cross-eyed in the process, but once you kind of do it a couple times, you get pretty good at just kind of catching it and labeling it. So, the way we describe emotions, like if you want to get real technical about it, if you want to get real clinical about it, like there's 800 worksheets, slides, things like that you can look at. We only presented 2 here, but quite a range.
And there's so much more within DBT too. And like this takes into consideration all of the other components of DBT, right? With like frustration tolerance. Well, I think that's a component of it, but like distress tolerance rather, and obviously this is like the core of like emotional regulation and all the, even I've taught half of this stuff for like 2 years and I'm like blanking out on some of the pillars of it all. But, this is like if we want to like, not intellectualize, but put it down to, not a formula. I don't know how to say it. Like,
if you want to really like chunk it out and like really sit down and do a step-by-step analysis and things like that, which sometimes is helpful, sometimes it's over analysis. Like we're getting too bogged down in details at that point.
But I think it's certainly useful for people who like have a hard time like being able to express these emotions, and like some people really need this like framework to like better conceptualize like, oh, this is how I like experience these things. And I think we might have talked about it in both episodes already, but not everything is going to work for everybody, right? This might not work for somebody else, but for somebody that needs to discuss emotional regulation and like learn those tools and tips and tricks and stuff like that, like this is just one way to conceptualize it, and in tandem with the emotions wheel, right? So we can better pinpoint, throw a dart and say, I feel that. Yep, there it is.
And me personally, I went to college initially for engineering. I had grand ambitions to be a civil engineer and to lay out, road grids and stuff like that. And then I hit like college level calculus and physics, and that was incredibly boring to
no.
me personally. Some people enjoy it.
Yeah.
And all of my college level psychology courses were incredibly fascinating to me. So I sophomore year jumped ship and went into psychology, and here I am today. But like for someone like me who's a little bit more that analytical minded and um, you know even going into psychology, I still took a statistics minor because I was good at math, right, and things like that. So like something like this model for describing emotion from DBT, like it was a good thing for me, just for me personally, but also for me as a therapist to be able to be like, well, this might be some way that we can look at it, right, and analyze it. So like it was something that becomes informative depending on kind of who you are, how you operate, things like that. And that's why, like as always, as you work with a therapist, as you kind of work on, at your own pace and things like that yourself, like finding different ways of describing stuff becomes incredibly helpful because you want to find the one that clicks and the one that works and makes the most sense for you. Because at the end of the day, our emotions are incredibly powerful forces that we can't necessarily like see, right? If I break my arm, I can go to a doctor, they take an x-ray, they go, there it is, and I go, oh, there it is, and that's the source of my pain. So let's put a cast on it and let's make it go away.
Yep.
You can't do that with anger. You can't do that with sadness. You can't do that with grief, with anxiety, with fear, with frustration. It's just, we can't pinpoint. We can't look at it.
No, and it's harder to cure, right? Like we can't just cure, the way that you like your mood or the way that you feel, right? I've had so many people say like, how do I feel better? Like, how do I stop being angry? And I'm like, I don't. Yeah, you kind of don't. Like, and it feels bad sometimes, right? Like to tell somebody, this is my job to help you work through your emotions and stuff like that. But that's exactly what I'm doing here. Like, and that's exactly what I'm going to tell you to do. Like, we have to work through these things. I can't just, the thing I say to all new clients is like, if I could hit you over the head with a wand that cures all of your ailments, all of your emotional and personal issues and things like that, I would. But then I'd be out of a job, and that's just not possible. I just can't do that.
Yeah, we'd have to charge a lot more for that wand.
I had to charge a lot more as a luxury service.
It's not that easy, and again, because I'm a descriptive kind of person, I'm more an analytical kind of person. Like one of the other things I came out of DBT that I really hooked onto, and I've used a lot is DBT talks a lot about a lot of spectrums type of thing, right? Where you're one end of the spectrum, the other end of the spectrum, both are unhealthy. Let's get to the middle, right? The gray area. And
the dialectic.
One of the dialectic is that literally the dialectic is the definite. That's the definition. And one of the dialectical dilemmas that they talk about is this one end of the spectrum. For those of you who can see me on video, right? I think I'm hitting the left side. Unrelenting crisis, other end, inhibited grieving, right? And it's about how we're experiencing that emotion. So unrelenting crisis being, I'm so consumed by it. It's all I see, feel, experience, and know.
Yep.
Right? I'm just in the emotional state. Other end of the spectrum, I'm inhibiting it. I'm shutting it down. I'm disconnected from it. I'm not in touch with it. Or when I come into contact with the emotion, I pull away real quick. Like Vincent, you were describing earlier, where someone might, someone who's anxious might be overwhelmed, and you could tell based on sight that the person's anxious, and another person might be frozen in place.
Yeah.
Right. And being at either end of that spectrum, not good. Obviously, if we're consumed by emotion, we're not thinking clearly, we're making impulsive decisions, things like that. If we're not in touch with our emotions, and to kind of throw the stereotypes out there again, it's less often now, but there was like a good stretch of my career where the only time I met a 55 and up male was after he thought he had a heart attack. And he went to the ER, doctor said he was fine. maybe at that time, and at that time period, they would have prescribed them Xanax without seeing a psychiatrist yet, which was never my favorite thing. But like, prescribe them Xanax and say, go find a therapist and a psychiatrist. Right? Yep. You're stressed out. You're overwhelmed. Go take care of that. So like someone who's not in touch with those emotions is prone to feel them very indirectly and suddenly. Right? It's that person who cries randomly at commercials in the car ride home. It's the person who just gets really unsettled and fidgety and restless all of a sudden. They just have a bad day where they just can't settle themselves, right? There's so much anxiety, but they're not labeling it yet. So it's just there. And they're just
like discomfort. Yeah.
And they're just uncomfortable all day.
I had somebody recently describe their anxiety to me as like a animal that couldn't like escape. And sorry, 1 second. I don't know what the heck I just did. There we go. Sorry about that. Minor technical difficulty. I had a client who described their anxiety but didn't really pin it as it didn't say it was anxiety, but said, I have like this, like when I get uncomfortable, I get like this beast like clawing at my chest. And first off, very descriptive. I appreciate that descriptor. Very succinct as to how anxiety can feel, but I ended up saying it sounds a lot like discomfort, a lot of like anxiety, like that like engine that's like revving up but like nowhere to go.
And dogs are a phenomenal example of this, where you can look at a dog and you can tell how it's feeling. It can't tell you, it doesn't have that language, but I could tell based on sight. So like having difficulty with words apparently, but having difficulty describing our emotions and processing them out, like it just can turn into this overwhelming force. It could turn into something I completely numb myself out to and disconnect from, and that's a quick way to find yourself burning out and having a quote unquote meltdown at some point. So one of the things I'll talk with people about is, as we get better and more capable of describing our emotions and labeling them and things like that, it means that we're inevitably coming into contact with them a little bit more. We're experiencing them, feeling them, sitting with them a little bit more. And this is something, and I haven't like delved too deep into it. I haven't really done any trainings on it, but people have probably heard of ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy. Yep. And this is like the overarching premise of ACT, is that we have to accept our emotions and commit to managing them and experiencing them, because when we don't, we tend to go wide left. We tend to experience difficulty. And my own personal, the example I always give for myself, I don't know when it happened, but at some point in my life, I developed an intense fear of heights. Messes me up. Don't know why. Can't even label it. There's like those moments where I have that like feeling of like, well, what if I fall? But that's not even necessarily there all the time. I just don't feel comfortable.
Yeah.
And this is unfortunately that I live in Jersey, but like any mall, the second floor, I don't go near the railing if I can avoid it.
Yeah.
Doesn't make me comfortable. And I've done my best to avoid it. Heights. My wife likes to, I think, purposefully throw me off sometimes. I went to the city at Christmas in New York, and she thought it'd be great to go to the top of the Rockefeller Center. And then she thought it'd be great to go to the top of the Rockefeller Center because there's another top. And then she thought it'd be phenomenal to get on this little disc platform, which rises 20 feet above the top of the rock. And you don't see the building when you're up there. And the pictures that it takes, I was smiling
through the pain.
I may have blacked out honestly at some point.
Yeah.
So I've done my best to avoid heights, right?
Yes.
But then we had kids, and We spent a lot of time at Six Flags, and my
Yeah.
wife, who loves roller coasters, got my kids into them and was throwing my kids on roller coasters. And I'm not going to be that schmuck father who's like, well, I'm not getting on, so you're just going to have to wait here with me, kids.
Yeah.
So I had to get on with my kids because they were too small to get on their own. And I knew it wasn't going to be a fun experience for me. So this is where the acceptance part comes in. I know I'm going to feel anxious. I know I'm going to feel afraid. I've got to find a way to muscle through it. And one of the things that I started doing, so if my kids end up listening to this, I apologize to three of them. My second son, third oldest, Jake, he has a phenomenal laugh, especially when he was younger. His laugh was awesome. I loved his laugh. And he loved roller coasters, and he would laugh the whole ride. So I always made sure I sat next to him because his laughter helped to counterbalance that fear and that anxiety. I still felt that anxiety, but if I could focus on him, if I could gear him up, oh, here comes the next drop. Here we go, Jake. We're going to go. Put your hands up. It freaked me out even worse, but I was up there putting my hands up with my 7, 8, 9-year-old son.
Yeah.
Just to get him more into it, to get him laughing more, to help me move through it. Right? And it's just one of those little examples that I like to give out there of just, it's an uncomfortable emotion, certainly. Do I enjoy feeling it? No. But I got to
develop your own. You developed your own coping skill, like your own strategy to that, right? Like, and that's kind of akin as to what along the lines of what we're talking about. But one of the things I say to people is like, yes, we have. I can go on and on and on about journaling, square breathing, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, meditation, all these different things that we talk about. But find what works for you, right? Like, and if Chris, like, if you found that going on a roller coaster is tough, but going on the roller coaster with your son and finding that he like focusing more on his laugh than instead of the experience itself kind of works, like, or for me, like, I hate needles. I can't do them. Like, when I go to and it's ironic because I worked at an urgent care for a couple of years. So, and even since then, I'm still not desensitized to any needles. Even my girlfriend's dog has diabetes. And like, when I see her, give him his insulin, I'm like, I go pale. I'm like, oh God, I can't do this. But at least in the context for me, like, when I go to the dentist or I go to the doctors or something like that, like, find myself focusing more on like other things, like, or honestly, like a component that is actually something that's part of DBT is like radical acceptance, right? Just the concept of the younger generation might better understand this, but like they say, Jesus, take the wheel, like let go, give up control, just have at it, because I can't change anything about it. So I might as well just accept the fact that it's coming. And it's only, how long does a needle really hurt for? 5, 6, 7 seconds, right? Like, I mean, unless you're really have some work done, but regardless, it doesn't hurt that bad after 5 or 6 seconds. And then you get numbed if you're doing dental work or whatever like that. Like, and then you get a lollipop and a cool looking sticker. So that's the things I look out for. I look forward to. But that's, just like one of my ways of, dealing with that, right? Just as you have found ways to deal with going on roller coasters, I have found ways to deal with getting needles jabbed in my arm.
And it's, the what we were saying earlier about the importance of being able to label and describe and experience and talk through those emotions. Like, if we're not doing that, then we can't do the problem solving. We can't figure out how to manage those emotions more effectively, whether it's by, I have the same issue with needles. I volunteered a lot with the Red Cross in college and high school, and in college I became known as the guy, like, they kept a running tally of how many times I would not be allowed to donate blood because my pulse was too high.
Oh my God. Wow.
It was I think the threshold was 100, and I was over that. I think I clocked 7 or 8 dismissals, and like the few times I got to the bed, and this didn't help, I didn't fill the bag. I stopped bleeding. while they were drawing the blood.
Oh my,
So
holy.
you're supposed to fill a 1 pint bag, and if you don't fill it, it can't be used.
Yeah.
So 2 of the 3 times I actually made it and calmed myself enough, I didn't fill the bag. And they were
so
the first 2 times. And when I went the 3rd time, they're like, "Are you really trying again?" I'm like, "I'm going to do this once. It is a fuck.
Prove it to myself.
My sticker. I want my first time donor pin, and I'm going to wear it for the rest of my college career." And I did. Every time I was at a drug club. So yeah, I have that same experience, and if you can't label it, you can't do the coping mechanisms. You can't engage them. You can't figure out how to muscle through.
And I think the reason why we want to even label any of that, though, is because, oftentimes emotions can be seen as a source of information, right? Like if I'm sad, or, if I'm anxious, what is that telling? Like, if you get anxious going to a blood drive, what does that tell you? Like, what does that anxiety tell you? It tells you that, man, I'm terrified of what's about to come, of the unknown, maybe. Or, if you're terrified of heights, like your head starts to run through all of the horror stories and the scenarios and stuff like that. And, you're not buckled in correctly and you shoot far up out of the seat or whatever. Like, what does that emotion tell you? Like, about what you're experiencing in that moment?
It can help us get in touch with that kind of what you're describing, that thought process, right? Because, the fear of heights, the thought of, well, what if I fall from this height? Okay, wait, Chris, there's a railing.
Back up.
I'm only 5'6". The railing's 4.5 feet tall. That would be one hell of an accident for me to go over that.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure as hell not trying to. How bad is getting a shot, getting a needle, an injection or something like that? Is it that big of a deal? So like we're able to kind of get in touch with that cognitive process that's happening with the emotion, which then allows us to challenge those thoughts and challenge our perspective in that moment.
I think a lot of times and something that kind of sticks out to me is the experience of burnout. And how a lot of times, I've worked a lot with burnout and people burning out from their careers, hobbies, things like that. And I've had plenty of times, and even myself, I can reflect back on that and think, I've heard people say, "Oh, I'm on my way to work in the morning, and all of a sudden, my heart starts to race. I start to have racing thoughts." But I've been doing this for 5, 10, 15 years, whatever. Why am I starting to feel this right now? And I'm like, well, let's consider the information that you're receiving, right? If you start to experience all of those things, you might be anxious. Why are you anxious? If you've been doing this for 10, 15 years, what's going on? And then they say that their job is an absolute hellhole and, everything's falling apart. And I'm like, all right, well, it makes sense why you're feeling that way. But, like that component of, that emotion, that anxiety is a source of information for us to say, all right, what's not working right now? Right? And it's probably the job, at least in this scenario.
Well, yeah, and that's I'm going to give for those of you who aren't therapists, a peek behind the curtain. But it's like one of those magician type of situations where one of our goals as a therapist is to give the client an aha moment, right? And sometimes if we can predict something, if we can call out something, it can spark that aha moment, and then it also looks a little impressive. So the kind of pulling the card out of the sleeve moment in that type of a scenario where a client is describing to me, I've been getting all this tension going into work in the mornings, I'm waking up exhausted, and then on weekends I'm fine, right? Because of the work I've done and the number of clients I've had, one of the first questions I start to ask now is, how big is the company you work for? And if it's a large one, the second question I ask is, are there layoffs coming? Is there a restructuring coming?
Yeah.
Is there downsizing that's been announced?
Yeah.
And I'm not going to say 9 times out of 10, that's giving it too much credit, but half the time people are like, yeah. I'm like, well, that makes sense. You're anxious as hell. You're afraid of what's going to happen. Yeah, but I've already been told I'm safe. Okay. Let's say it's downsize and restructure, right? What is your team going to look like after that?
Yeah.
how much
You know,
work are you now anticipating?
you might be
yeah,
safe.
no, I know it's going to be a lot.
Yeah. But the work environment might look totally different, which is also just another component of change, and humans not really liking change because we're quite resistant to it. But the overall, component of that is, it's not, it might not even be the job itself, but the circumstances surrounding it, going forward after that type of experience, right?
Yeah, so it becomes a nice means of figuring out what are triggers, even though we haven't necessarily labeled them as triggers yet.
And those types of things are like, through our perspective, right? If I'm just like a worker bee at a job, let's say, I don't know, whatever I'm doing, and I see all these layoffs coming around, like me, and from let's say other worker bees are getting laid off. I hope worker bee doesn't come off like derogative or anything like that, but like, let's say I see a bunch of other worker bees getting laid off, and through my perspective as a fellow worker bee, I'm thinking, what's going to happen to me? Am I going to get canned? And maybe the upper management might not really see it that way, because through their perspective, they're like, we're upper management. I can't get fired. I got a 401k and a pension hanging out with me. Like,
yep. And even because I've had one client who every 2 years her company does restructuring. One year they called it reimagining, and I was like, oh, that's fun.
Disney,
yeah,
all right.
They really tried to make it more palatable. And I've been working with her on and off for a while, and earlier in our work, every time it would happen, there was tons of anxiety. And then somewhere a couple of years ago, during one round, she started talking to her financial advisor more in depth. And she found out, oh, I could actually retire now. I don't want to retire yet, but I could. She was a lot less anxious since then.
Yeah.
In dealing with these layoffs and these restructurings. She's a lot more secure. So when they get announced and they're coming down the pike, she's like, if it happens, it happens. I'll collect my severance and I'll move on with my day. Whereas 8 years ago, when she was farther from that like secure retirement age, totally different experience.
Yeah.
And that's something that, literally the same process, different emotional experience. And it's informed by what's going on elsewhere. And then on top of that, she also talks about this idea of, well, you're doing it again, bring it on. I've survived this far. I've made it through 5 rounds of layoffs this time.
What's
Come
another?
at me, bro.
Yeah.
Almost like she's challenging it, because she's at that point where, because of that security that she has financially, and just the fact that she's weathered all of these storms already, she's come out a lot more resilient, right?
And I've heard a lot of people say, you know what? Do it. Like, do it. See what happens. Bring it on. Like, you think I care? Not really. I'll retire. Like, but that's, like developing that safety net and that cushion of like, getting yourself emotionally, like, how do I want to say this? Like, developing that like safety net of like, okay, if this happens, like, how am I gonna, how am I gonna work around like this emotional like experience, right? And now you made that cushion of like, all right, well, if you can retire, then what's the matter with me? Fire me.
Yeah. And
I'm not saying actually get fired and want to get fired, but
yeah. And
that should never be your goal.
In that scenario, she doesn't want to be fired. She wants to keep working. She'd like to stay at the company she's at because she's been there a long time. But like, she knows she's got it if she is laid off. She knows she'll be okay on the other side of this transition. And that came with processing it out and working through it.
Which can conversely, I think, look, how do I want to explain this? Like, the emotional experience and the action urges can look very different in the way that in the way that you experience your emotions. So like, let's say that I really don't even like my job, and now I know that layoffs are coming down the pipeline, and like, they're saying like, oh, you got to get your productivity up. Like, somebody might say like, I have to do better because I need this job. And that's an emotional experience of like, maybe some anxiety, safety, things like that. But the other emotional experience and response and the action urge just could be like flipping up the bird and be like, whatever, I don't care, fire me.
And there's
Show to me.
times where a client will be like, well, I already work a 50-hour week. What else do you want from me? I'm going to start looking.
Yeah,
and that's exactly better than this.
That is that action urge, right? Like the one side of like, if they fire me, that's fine, I got retirement. And then the other side saying, there's got to be something better than this.
And this is where, if we could, kind of be, if mental health was a little bit more like medical, physical health, right? What a phenomenal thing would be is if, as a therapist, I had a button where I could click it and shift the emotion in the moment, right? So a client who's experiencing all this anxiety about potential layoffs, and the number of times I've heard of bosses be like, reviews are coming up. You want to make sure you're doing well, so why don't you work late tonight?
Can I get that TPS report?
Yeah, TPS report, right? If I could take their anxiety out and insert some anger, they're going to have a very different experience.
Yeah.
Because now they're going to be like, you know what? I don't need this place. I'm going to start looking. I'm going to get my resume brushed up, and I'm going to put it, make sure LinkedIn's all tidied up and all that kind of stuff. And I'm going to start applying to jobs. To heck with this. I'm not going to quit. Right? I need this.
Not offer it. Yeah. But until I find something better.
Yeah. I'm going to start creating my exit strategy because I don't think they're going to fire me, but I don't want to have to keep dealing with this nonsense.
No, and I think that's also something that's so incredibly common in today's day and age of, I think people are starting to value their worth as employees and stuff like that. And this is kind of how that comes out. Like, we use our emotions as an action urge, maybe sometimes a little bit too flippantly. I mean, even I'll admit that I've sometimes acted a little bit too much on emotion, but I think, for at least for your job, it's your livelihood. Might as well, you're going to be working for 50, 60 years. Might as well enjoy it while you can. In a place that you can.
When we talked about that idea of unrelenting crisis versus inhibited grief, right? It's a spectrum. And we want to be somewhere in the middle. So sometimes we need to get a little bit more emotionally driven and act on that. And sometimes we're too emotionally overwhelmed, so we got to pull back and we have to kind of numb it out a little bit and kind of, we'll say, suppress it for later, right? I can't get all kinds of bent out of shape right now, so I'm going to package it up. I'm going to put it in a box, and then I'm going to get home and I'm going to go to a rage room in Toms River, New Jersey, and I'm going to beat the hell out of some plates and a printer.
That sounds awesome.
Get that emotion out there. They are fun. So and we're talking about this a lot about with work and things like this, but sometimes usually even more impactfully is when it comes up in relationships, right? The number of times I've met clients who've been married for decades or who've been married for a long time with their partner for a long time, that classic, like, kind of tongue-in-cheek notion of you go to therapy to blame your parents. Sometimes it's accurate, actually.
Yeah.
It is their fault. So, like, the frequency with which I reflect back to a client and I'm saying, like, well, yeah, they're triggering the heck out of you. They're triggering the heck out of these emotions, this anxiety, this anger, this agitation. A text message on a Sunday night can carry so much weight for someone. Where they get that text message, I'm really tired of the way you acted this weekend. And the swell of anxiety I've seen people feel, and fear, and tension, and restlessness, and discomfort, and fear. I think I said that already. Like, our relationships, the people we're closest to, have such, it's like a pick line straight to our heart.
Yep.
Where they have such a direct impact on how we feel. And if we can't label that, how do we set boundaries?
And it's something that kind of like runs through my mind as we talk about this in the context of relationships is it's never about the garbage, right? It's never about the dishes, right? Like, that's just the precedent for the emotion that you're experiencing. Like, or rather it's the vessel for the emotion that you're experiencing. Like you come in and, in relationships, let's say, I didn't do any of my chores throughout the day that I was supposed to do, and instead I sat on my computer, and because I'm an old school RuneScape player, for any listeners listening or watching, I sat on my computer and I played old school RuneScape all day, grinding, fishing, and my girlfriend comes home and she says, "What the hell, Vin? What's going on with the dishes?" And it's not about the dishes. It's about the fact that I sat on my butt all day, did nothing.
And that's one of the fun ones as a therapist, where you really go hog wild analyzing, because on the one hand, right, she's angry because you didn't do what you promised to do, and now you're breaking a promise. So now we talk about, okay, well, when you say you're going to do something, do you follow through? We also talk about, episode 2, we talked about forms of support, right? The I'll take it off your plate support, figuratively, literally in this case. Because if I come home and I see the sink is full, I go, well, now I have to wash the dishes. But you've been sitting there. Why couldn't you provide that support?
Yeah.
And what the heck was the name of the movie? Vince Vaughn, Jennifer Aniston.
Wedding Crashers?
The Breakup, I think it was called, where she talks about I want you to want to do the dishes, and he's like, I would never want to do the dishes. And they get into an argument about that. It's not about him. No one wants to do it. She doesn't want to do the dishes either. She wants you to want to provide that support.
Yes.
Right? And so, even in something as simple as that argument, what are the emotions that are involved? It's anger, it's frustration, it's exhaustion, it's overwhelmed, it's stress, it's all these. Okay, so what does that tell you about the relationship? And that's one of those, things that, as a therapist, I could spend entire sessions talking with clients about, analyzing and breaking these situations down and going, well, that's the 5th time in the last 3 months that this has come up.
I think a lot of, maybe even my own sessions, I should start using the wheel of emotions more, because it is you could break that down to a million different things. Yeah, in the movie, Jennifer Aniston must have been angry, but, what did she really feel about that? I mean, she could have felt resentful or irritated, suspicious. I mean, maybe not suspicious, but skeptical, sarcastic, critical, they all break down.
You could even dip into the sad piece of the pie and say abandoned, right?
Yeah.
Lonely, isolated, right? Empty, that type of stuff. Because I should be able to rely on my partner's support, and they're not going to. So I feel pretty lonely in this venture, in this partnership. So yeah, the ability to kind of label and process out emotions and figuring out where they come from, why they're triggered, what do they lead us to do, and things like that. And we'll talk about this more in further episodes when we talk about relationship boundaries and mental health diagnoses, right? We all know we've all heard the word anxiety. When does it raise to the level of a generalized anxiety disorder? People are anal retentive. When does that raise to the level of OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder? People are sad. When does that raise to the level of a major depressive disorder?
Yeah. When is it just an episode? When is it recurrent?
So being able to, it all comes back to being able to label those emotions and talk through them.
Yeah. Just what a powerful tool that is, though. So be able to know and label your emotions. It really. It sounds obvious, right? The tool that you have, really can benefit your relationships and, honestly, every component of your life, right? Being able to label emotions helps you intrapersonally, helps you at work, helps you with loved ones, helps with my freaking cats. I don't know. I get upset and I'm like, why am I so furious? And then I can look at the emotion wheel and say, nah, I think I'm not furious. Maybe I'm more frustrated. Maybe I'm more irritable because they won't stop meowing for an hour at a time.
At 4 a.m.
At 4 a.m. for food. Isn't that right?
If you can't add, you can't do trigonometry, you can't do geometry, you can't do algebra 1 or 2 or calculus, you can't do statistics, you might not even be able to do a haiku, because you can't add up the syllables. Go to English class.
You can't clap?
Yeah. You might not be able to keep time in music class or music theory.
Yes.
All this stuff, right? being able to label our emotions is such a function, like a fundamental core component of how we operate. So it's just hugely important.
Yeah, and I think to kind of like route it all the way back to the beginning of the episode, we talk about this thing as children, and like our parents say, like my sister has two children. One of the oldest is like a year and a half, almost about to be 2 years old, and she's like reading him books and showing him like happy, sad, annoyed, like just like the basic ways to describe that. And that's just for an infant level, right? For, phonetics and linguistics and stuff like that, just to get them to start talking. But, that's something we learned so early on, just, pull it right back up again. We learn anger, disgust, sad, happy, surprise, fear, and probably other ones as well. But it's not until, we maybe even get a little bit older, or maybe we, start to seek our own therapy, or, we just do our own research where it breaks down from those, those 6 core emotions into, subsets of different emotions and feelings and descriptors to say, how I feel. Because saying I'm sad is not just enough more often than not. I could look at my friends and say, I'm sad. And they'll say, what am I supposed to do with that information here? You feel worse, what? Give me a little bit more. And I just say, nah, I don't know. I start kicking my feet. I'm just sad. Which actually might be more melancholic if I'm just saying, I'm just sad. Like, well, which is a part of that descriptor. It just goes full circle.
It starts out with one simple thing, and then as we parse it out, it becomes more complicated and consequently more informative. You're sad. Yes. Well, I'm just sad. Well, maybe you're melancholic. Maybe you're kind of stuck in a rut then. Maybe you gotta spice it up a little bit. Make sure you're doing some new things. Mm-hmm. You're engaging your hobbies. I'm sad because I don't think I'm doing well at work. Okay, well, you're feeling insecure. So what can we do about that? How do we bolster your sense of self-esteem and things like that at work? And, at the end of the day, like, it's just such a complicated process. And, back to episode 1, it's where therapy can sometimes come in, because it's sometimes just really helpful to have a guide in learning how to describe our emotions and getting in touch and getting insightful with how we feel and how we operate. So,
absolutely. I mean, once, like you were saying, like, this is why we do therapy. This is why we become therapists, to teach people sometimes, like, how to use how to use this language, how to engage in them, and also how to cope with them and how to process them, and even how to, like, sometimes use them to our advantage, like we said, like, with information gathering and stuff like that. But I'm excited to see how this will tie in to our next episode, which is going to be focused on anxiety, because I think this whole wheel of emotions, and for forthcoming episodes regarding different topics like also depression, OCD, things like that, like this wheel of emotion will come up ever so frequently.
Yep. Every episode it'll come up. I might even just have it up on deck just to make sure that I can bring it up. It's just we're gonna paint it on the back of our walls here. And we'll just just point at it. Like, right there. That's what's happening.
Maybe for Halloween, I'll paint my face as the wheel of emotions.
Yeah, we'll say every Halloween episode. That'd be interesting.
Yes,
I'm not going to. I'll be normal.
I'm a total weirdo. I will absolutely. For one of my hobbies, I dress up as Elsa from Frozen. So not because I like cosplaying, but because I do it for the love of the game. Yeah. But that we'll get into that at one point or another. But. Anyway, Chris, what are you thinking? Any final kind of thoughts, comments, suggestions, as we kind of start to wrap up this episode?
Yeah, our emotions are a complicated mess. Ridiculously important to sort it all out, to figure it all out. Because the better we get at doing that, the better we develop that language. It just makes it all kind of easier to figure out what to do next in any given scenario. So, watch Inside Out. Both of those movies are phenomenal. Eventually, I'm going to start to plug Disney and see if they'll pay me for the promotion. But process, talk through it. Find your supports and engage it.
I think that's just the biggest part of it. Just my final thought is, just talk. Just talk, right? Like that's how we learn how to use this language. And that's how we even learn that this is language that we can use, and if you don't talk, you'll never really find out any of this. And then next thing you know, you'll bottle it up, and then you bottle your emotions up, and then you blow up one day, you blow your top. And then next thing you know, you're in therapy because your loved one said, you need therapy because you're bottling things up. And then you come into therapy and say, my loved one said I need to go to therapy because I bottle things up. And then you start the language. And then we end up agreeing with them.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So on that note, I think this is it. Guys, gals, non-binary pals, thank you for joining us on the Seaglass Perspective today, episode 3, talking about the feels wheel and emotions. And I mean, this is called Wheel of Emotions, but I know it by the feels wheel. Next episode is we're talking about anxiety, and we're just excited to see you guys there. And if you have any thoughts, comments, complaints, suggestions, I hope not complaints. I hope you guys enjoy it so far. But any constructive criticism, I will say, leave it down in the comments. We're always very much so interested in hearing everybody's thoughts and feedback. And if you have any questions for us ourselves, we'll leave our contact information down in the description. You can find us at seaglasscounselingandwellness.com and, various Psychology Today profiles and whatnot. But either way, I'm Vincent Covelli, joined by my co-host, Christopher Nakos. Have a good one. Nakos. Nakos. We got it at the beginning of the episode. It's okay. But anyway, everybody, take care, and we'll see you for the next episode.